All right, we're back with another episode of Black Life Amplified. This is the virtual town hall series hosted by the African American Leadership Forum. My name is Brittany Elbright with Insight News, and it is my absolute honor and privilege to be able to host this town hall and speak to members of my community on important issues from COVID-19 to Black life here in the Twin Cities. Before we get started, I want to give a special thanks to our sponsors, which include the Minneapolis Foundation, Northpoint Health and Wellness, and Children's Minnesota for making this town hall possible. I also want to give a very special thanks to our community partner organizations, including Northpoint, Children's Minnesota, Insight News, Gray Matter, Spokesman-Recorder, and Minnesota Community Care. Also want to give a shout out to the Coven for allowing me to broadcast from their space today. Now, if you didn't get a chance to watch last week's show, we talked about the trial in public safety and how our local elected officials plan to lead during the Chauvin trial. You can view the full conversation on the African American Leadership Forum Facebook page and YouTube page. And I do encourage you all to check it out. We talked to Mayor Fry, Councilmember Jenkins. We talked to Public Safety Commissioner Harrington, as well as Sasha Cotton from the Office of Violence and Prevention. And it was a very fruitful conversation about Operation Safety Net and what exactly our local elected leaders and city officials and state officials have planned in response to the Derek Chauvin trial. Now, on today, this is essentially part 2 of that conversation, but today we're talking to our community members, people who aren't in official positions where maybe they can't speak truth to power the way that they would like to. We want to really hear from the people who were directly impacted by the uprising that took place, by the murder of George Floyd, and the countless other murders that have taken place here in the state of Minnesota at the hands of law enforcement. Before we do that, of course, this is a COVID-19 town hall, or at least that's how our town hall started, was focusing on the pandemic and the disproportionate impacts of the Black community. And so here to give us updates today is Miss Adrienne Thornton from Children's Minnesota. Adrienne is a nurse and infection preventionist. So welcome back to the show, Adrienne. You are muted. I cannot hear you, Adrienne. Come back.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
There we go. Yes. Thank you for having me and getting me off of mute.
No problem. It's great to hear you and it's great to see you like always. How are you doing with everything that's going on?
If I had to give it a letter grade, I would give it a C. I'm about a C. I am tired. I am exhausted. I am weary. I'm hopeful. It's kind of a mix of everything. I'm glad we have vaccines to get us out of this pandemic. I'm disappointed that the distribution of those vaccines hasn't been as equitable as it should have been or could have been, but still hopeful that we will be able to utilize the vaccines to help us move out of this pandemic. So I'm kind of in a strange place now where I'm weary yet still hopeful for our future, our near future. I don't want to think about this for 2022. I'm hoping we'll be out of this by 2022.
Do you think that's possible?
Anything's possible. Is it realistic? It depends, because the country is so divided on what we should do. The CDC has given clear guidance. The government has given clear guidance. But as a people, we are still not all on the same page. Everyone doesn't agree with masking and social distancing as noticed by the multiple states who have gotten rid of their masking mandates. We're not on the same page with vaccine, even though we know the vaccines are safe and effective. Everyone is still not convinced that they should get it. So until we all get on the same page, I think that it's going to be hard for us to move to a point where we won't be dealing with this in 2022. Hopeful is possible. The reality is it's going to be difficult for us to get there.
Well, it makes me wonder how we're going to get there when there are states like Texas that have lifted their mask mandate. So how How and why? Do you think it's safe? Have their rates of transmission gone down that much that it's safe for them to return to business as usual? Or is this going to set us back?
This is definitely going to set us back. The numbers have been increasingly going down. We've seen fewer cases, we've seen fewer deaths, but it's not zero. We still see transmission. And what we're seeing now is we're seeing an increase in the transmission of the variants to the COVID-19. So the ones that we've heard about from the UK and South Africa, we started with just a few of those cases in the US, and now we're seeing that those variants spread much faster than the original variant of COVID-19. So that puts us in a real hard place, because as we're decreasing transmission of the original virus, we're now seeing an increase in the variants transmitting, which is why, removing the mask mandates is a really bad idea right now, because we still have a lot of people that aren't vaccinated because we haven't had enough vaccine to vaccinate the entire country or the world. And, you have to remember that some of our countries that have fewer resources and don't have access to vaccines the way we do, they are still seeing fairly large numbers of transmission. And so we're not a world unto ourselves. And I think that's what people fail to realize is we're doing fairly well in the US. We're not where we need to be, but we are doing better. But as long as there are pockets of transmission in other countries, then we are still at risk. And we actually have pockets of transmission within our own country. So there is always the risk that we could see another surge in cases, another surge in hospitalizations, another surge in the numbers of death. We could undo all the good work that we've done over the last few months. So, getting rid of the mask mandate was definitely a bad choice. And, we are expecting to see increases in cases and hospitalizations and deaths as a result. What we hope is that, the outbreaks and the spreads are limited to those states, but we know that's not going to happen because people are still traveling. People are traveling and vacationing. And when they do that, they're not following the guidance. They go on vacation and they go to the beach and they take off their masks and they're around a bunch of people. Nobody's doing hand hygiene. And so we know that we're going to have issues within the next few weeks because people are not following the guidance as they should.
It's really frustrating because it's like, I feel like we're getting so much closer, right? We're under a new administration who actually believes in COVID and wearing masks. We have vaccines. The vaccine rollout process, although imperfect, is actually underway. And yet it seems like we're continuing to take steps back. And we know better, right? And it really makes me wonder if people are gaining a false sense of security, or could it just be COVID fatigue? I mean, we're coming up on a year, right? That this pandemic, that we've known that we've been in a pandemic. And do you think it's just willful ignorance, or do people still not understand how serious this is?
Yeah, I think the answer is and.
Mm-hmm.
It is willful ignorance. It is COVID fatigue. It is a false sense of security. I think it's all of those combined. And, people are tired. They want to get their lives back. They want to see their family. They want to go back to having fun and frolicking on the beach. We all get it. However, we have to be safe in how we do that until we're completely out of the pandemic. And so I think, the people that say, well, I've had COVID and so I'm not going to get it again, or, this is a hoax and I don't believe it, or wearing a mask doesn't make a difference. There are tons of studies out there that prove them wrong. And so they are choosing to ignore the science. That's what they're doing, which is unfortunate, even though we have experts that talk about the science every day, in social media, on national news, and people are still choosing to ignore that information and make the decision that their understanding is better than the science, which is unfortunate because that is where we get into the biggest trouble. If you're going to go around a group of people, you still need to be wearing your mask, you still need to be social distancing, and you still need to be washing your hands frequently. I mean, it is what it is. It's not going to change anytime soon. Even with us vaccinating people, we still need to do the 3 Ws. And so if you go to the beach, you still need to keep your social distance. You don't necessarily have to wear a mask on the beach, but for sure you need to keep your social distance. If you're on the beach and there are a bunch of other people on the beach and you can't, socially distant, then you need to have on your mask. And no one wants to be on the beach with the mask on, but if you're not keeping social distance, that's what we have to do. And so I think people just need to contend with the fact that if we want to get out of this pandemic and we want some sort of normalcy to come back, we have to slow down, we have to do the right thing, and we have to listen to the science. We can't just decide that we're going to go off and do our own thing because we're tired and we don't believe what the scientists say.
Right. Now, we've had some nice weather days, and nice being relative. I laugh because we'll pivot to Io in just a little bit, who's actually experiencing nice weather. But for the Twin Cities, I'll say, it hasn't been freezing. Some snow has been melting. It's been warmer temperatures, and as community members are beginning to assemble to protest and let their voices be heard in response to the Derek Chauvin trial, outdoor activities are starting to happen, right? We're seeing more people going outside than they have been in the past few months. Now, if you are participating in an outdoor protest or function of some sort, is that a safe time where you can take off your mask if you're not within 6 feet of another person?
The only person at a protest or a rally that should be taking off their mask is a person that's at a podium who is speaking to the crowd. And even then, you really shouldn't take it off unless everyone around you is at least 6 feet away. We say 6 feet, the further the better, but for sure at least 6 feet, And I was really pleasantly surprised to see in the reports of the peaceful protests that occurred on Monday, everyone had on a mask in the crowd. I was so thrilled because that is the first step to stopping transmission. And so if you're going to be participating in the peaceful protest and having your voice heard, have it heard through a mask. And, people should carry alcohol hand rub with them. I know that that's a pain, but even before this, I have it in my car. I have a little bottle in my purse, and my kids each have one with them. And so keep it on your person so that as you're shaking hands and bumping fists, that you can do hand hygiene in between. Because again, we have to remember that in all of this, Black and brown communities are the ones that are disproportionately impacted from the disease, from hospitalizations, and from death. We are the ones who are dying at the greatest rate. We're the ones who are in the hospital at the greatest rate. We're the ones who are getting sick with COVID at the greatest rate, but yet we are the lowest rate of vaccination. And so with all of that in mind, we have to protect ourselves and our community. And if we don't want our community to continue to suffer from COVID-19, then we have to do the right thing. And so until you can get, 80, 90% of our community vaccinated, we have to continue to do what we know is right, which is the 3 Ws. Wear your mask, wash your hands frequently, and watch your distance.
Now, speaking of the trial, during jury selection, the first day of jury selection was officially yesterday, since the first day of the trial was postponed due to that third-degree charge that the judge is deliberating on. But as each jury member came in the courtroom, they came in one by one. And of course, this was off camera to protect the identity of the jurors. But we did see into the courtroom in terms of the defense team and the judge. And the judge who was behind plexiglass, would tell the juror, it's okay if you want to take your mask off to speak so that we can hear you, and so that the court reporter can hear what you're saying. In those situations, if they're not outdoors, they're indoors, but they are at least 6 feet apart and behind plexiglass. And in a case like that, is that also acceptable in terms of preventing transmission? Or is it possible that COVID then just becomes in the air and then the next juror that comes in could potentially be exposed?
As long as they're keeping their social distance, we should be okay. What you don't want is to have 2 or 3 jurors sitting near each other while one of them is removing their mask. And so, as long as they are spaced out, they're away from each other, they're away from the judge, and when they remove their mask, there's no one else around them, that should be okay. We really want you to keep your mask on, but if you have to take it off, you want to make sure that everyone around you is a safe distance from you, so that if by chance you are carrying the virus, that you don't expel it and then possibly transmit it to others. And so again, we want you to keep your mask on as much as you can, but if you have to take it off for a short time just to speak and, be heard, make sure that you are a safe distance. And I wasn't able to see it, but I don't think they had a lot of spectators in the courtroom, which would be a great thing, because trying to social distance a lot of spectators would add another layer of complexity to the situation. And so having as few people in the courtroom as possible, which is what I think they were trying to do, is the best way to prevent transmission. But, keep your mask on as much as possible. But if you have to take it off, say what you have to say, and put it back on, and then do hand hygiene.
Got it. Now, I'm wondering, as you mentioned, how this is going to work, because typically jurors are in close proximity to one another, both in the courtroom. Now we're still in jury selection process, so they're right now being interviewed one by one. But in a few weeks, when the trial actually starts, in a traditional courtroom, the jurors are sitting, in 2 rows, typically side by side. And so I'm wondering what the capacity of the courtroom is. We haven't been able to see a full picture because, again, they do want to protect the identity of the jurors, but it does make me wonder what the layout is going to be in terms of how the jurors assemble into the courtroom. And then also when they go back into their private quarters for deliberation, how that is going to happen in a way in which you keep 6 people, 12 people, 6 feet apart. I don't know, but I'm definitely, they have made it known. They've asked every juror so far, do you have any concerns about COVID? Do you feel safe, et cetera? So it's definitely something for us to continue to watch out for. A few more questions for you before we get into more details about the trial and we speak to our other panelists. But I wanted to ask you, I looked up some information about testing yesterday, and I'm noticing that there are a lot of free testing sites that are available, and then there are some that require payment. Is there a difference in treatment or testing modality between the paid and the unpaid testing sites?
I'm not familiar with the paid sites. I know they are out there. I haven't really investigated them, but I think the payment or non-payment depends on who's managing the site. So the state represented sites are all free because the state wants to make sure that everyone has access to testing. If there is a private entity that has access to testing and wants to offer it, those places tend to charge. And that's because they are a private entity. They are most likely not working with the state, and they are purchasing all of their own test supplies and test kits. And so they perhaps are trying to recoup the finances that they have exerted to get the test. And so that is, from what I've seen, the few test sites that are asking for payment have been private sources, the few that I've looked at. I don't know if that's the case for all of them because I haven't looked at all of the sites that request payment, but the ones that are represented and supported by the state are all free. And so if you need to get testing, the tests are pretty much the same. They all look for the same thing. The way they do the test may differ, but they are all looking for the COVID-19 virus. And so if you can get one done at one of the state supported sites where it's free, I would recommend doing that. You don't get any additional information from the sites that offer testing that you have to pay for.
Okay. Okay. And now there's home testing. Do you recommend that? What do you know about these COVID-19 home testing kits? Is this even legit?
The home testing kits are great for families. So if you are not trying to come to your healthcare provider and you want to stay away from the public as much as possible, the home testing kits are a great tool. For instance, if you have a child in school and you find out that they have perhaps been exposed to someone with COVID and you want to monitor your family to see if anyone in your family develops COVID as a result, the home testing kits are appropriate for that use. I wouldn't use them if you're really ill, if you're symptomatic and you're experiencing health issues related to an exposure, or you think that you may have COVID and you're feeling ill, then I would recommend that you contact your healthcare provider and have a test done there. And if you do it at home, that's fine. But if you go to your health provider, they will most likely retest you. So there's nothing wrong with the home testing kits, but just know that it's more for families to monitor and to, just kind of test within your own household in terms of how it's impacted by the rest of the community. It's a little different. And so we do prefer the PCR tests that are done at healthcare settings for those tests if you're ill and symptomatic.
All right. And then final question. The saliva test now is available in the state of Minnesota. So you don't just have to do the nasal swab anymore. You can do the saliva test, in which you're essentially spitting into what's like a little test tube and mixing it with some solution, shaking it up, and that's really it. But they say to not eat, drink, or smoke unless 30 minutes before you take the test. If you do eat, drink, smoke within that 30-minute time frame, does that throw off your results? Is your saliva harder to read? What is the implication behind that?
Yeah, if you eat, drink, or smoke before you do the test, it can alter the results. So what we have to remember is that COVID-19 loves a warm, moist place to live and breathe and replicate. And that is why we test the nose, because it's nice and dark and warm and moist in there. And that is where most of the virus will live if you're carrying it. Because you carry it in your nose, of course, our nose and our mouth are pretty much well connected. And so you will have virus in your saliva as well. If you eat, drink, or smoke, you may dilute or change or alter the amount of virus that is able to be detected in your saliva. And so that is why we say don't eat, drink, or smoke within 30 minutes, so that the specimen that you give is a nice, fresh specimen that is hopefully full of COVID-19 virus if you are carrying it. You can still detect it sometimes if you have a really high viral load, if you've done anything like eat, drink, or smoke before, but we can't guarantee it. And so it's best that you don't do any of those things so that the specimen is nice and full of that COVID-19 virus.
Got it. So no eating, no drinking, no smoking for at least 30 minutes right before you go and get your saliva test done so that you can have the most accurate results possible. Well, Adrienne, thank you for this information. And of course, we want to encourage our viewers to call the COVID-19 hotline to receive more information about testing facilities and what testing sites are available. There are some walk-up locations available within the Twin Cities, some drive-up locations, and then others are requiring appointments. So make sure you call the line, find out who's testing in your area and what type of tests are available. Now we're going to go ahead and pivot into the next segment in our conversation. Adrienne, I'm definitely going to be coming back to you in a little bit because I'd love to get your opinion on some things, but I want to do a quick recap of jury selection. So yesterday was the first day of jury selection. As we mentioned, Monday, International Women's Day, Although it was technically the first day of the trial, not a whole lot happened because there were questions about this third-degree murder charge and whether or not that was going to stick. And so jury selection officially began yesterday. And we're going to recap who was selected, who wasn't, and why. This has been very interesting to me. And so, panelists, I would love to hear from you and get your feedback on what you think about the makeup of the jury thus far. So, juror number one, she self-identified as a Hispanic woman. She expressed concerns about her English proficiency. Now, they asked her, do you understand, the things that are being said thus far? And she said, yes, but I do just want to name that English is my second language, and so that there could be barriers. However, there hasn't been anything that I haven't understood until this point. She admitted to watching details of the trial on TV prior to knowing that she was going to be a juror, and then, of course, stopped, which is what they ask of you once the jury is selected. She also remembers and detailed in the courtroom George Floyd pleading for his life while under the knee of Officer Chauvin, and saying she felt like George Floyd was denied his humanity and people shouldn't be treated like that. She's a mother with 2 adult sons and 1 daughter, and ended up not being selected because she was called less sophisticated. And these are the words of the legal team. They called her less sophisticated and said that they didn't think that she would be able to fully understand all of the legal terminology that was used, or if there was medical terminology that would be used if a medical examiner or another professional came in to provide details of the case. And so for that reason, she was dismissed as a juror. I want to ask our panelists, we've got Ayo Mack Ayalanda. Welcome. She is the co-creator of the Black Family Blueprint. And then we've also got Amity Daimak, who is an activist and the mother of Kobe Heisler. Welcome, ladies, to Black Life Amplified. I want to hear from you. What do you think about that first juror being dismissed? Was that the right decision to make, or did that indicate maybe some racial bias?
Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me. So, I think that our justice system is rooted in racial bias, and so I wish I had higher expectations, and at the same time, I really don't expect it to be anything other than what it always has been, which has been a system of injustice for Black and brown people.
Absolutely. I was able to get some coverage of the protests that were happening. And I just think about the chant, the whole damn system's guilty as hell. And when I hear that chant, what I hear is community members calling for a level of accountability, not just in this particular trial, but an overhaul of an entire system that perpetuates these type of inequities. So I think that is a shared sentiment for sure. Juror number 2, he mentioned that he is a former camp counselor, worked with young people a lot, a chemist, and described himself as being a logical person, has only shared with his boss and fiance that he was a juror and did not disclose details of the case, actually attended George Floyd Square, 38th in Chicago, and has had incidents with MPD, one in which he had an incident, somebody developed road rage, and so he called MPD to get some support. He didn't get the support that he needed in the time frame that he needed, but still considers himself to be an advocate of community policing. What I found interesting is that he said that he wants to get to know policing better and to spend more time with them. He is a supporter of all lives matter, but believes that Black lives are important. He self-identifies as white and ended up being selected for jury duty. So I want to ask Amity, what do you think about a juror who is selected who supports all lives matter instead of Black lives matter?
Just as the prior panelists stated, it's the whole system is guilty as hell. I think that I'll have to admit that I haven't been watching the jury selection. I have to work. My guy keeps on coming in and trying to tell me about it. I said, I don't want to hear it. I'll listen to it, when it gets done. But I think it's supposed to be a jury of our peers. And to say that the first woman is not a peer and unsophisticated, I think is offensive. She had stated that she was able to understand everything up until that point. So I don't know why they let her go. And then, of course, jury selection is just so frustrating. But of course, they're going to take the all lives matter white man. And I think that's just frustrating. I think that sometimes the system loses the whole peer part of it with this whole jury selection. And, there's people that have jobs simply to pick a jury. That's how important it is, and how much you can influence a trial through the selection of the jury. And I think that's pretty scary.
Yeah, this has definitely been an interesting and unique process to be able to witness. A question that I saw an audience member have that I haven't gotten the answer to, but I am committed to finding out, is who comes up with the questions that these jurors are asked. So the way in which this works is, first, a potential jury member is summoned. They're told you'll need to come in on these particular dates. They aren't told the details of the case, but given that this was the particular case, there's a little more fine tape than a little more red tape than a traditional jury selection process. And so then they were told that they could potentially be a panelist in this particular trial, and that they would need to fill out a survey to gather information on whether or not they would be qualified to be a panelist now, or a jury member. And they fill out the information, they submit it, and they are now being asked questions in the courtroom based on what they put in this assessment. And then from there, it will be decided on whether or not they'll actually make it to be one of the official jurors during the trial. And so when we think about transformative justice and systemic change, I think these are some of the things that need to be taken into consideration, is what questions are asked that make someone qualified, unqualified, what makes someone sophisticated or not. The jury will convene on March 29th at 9 a.m. But for now, jury selection continues. Yesterday, juror number 3 ended up being excused from the case. She didn't think that she could be a juror because she hoped for an intended outcome and was not sure that she would be able to honestly put her personal bias aside and focus on the details of the case. That's another important facet to know and understand about this particular case, and the way in which jury duty works is it's okay if you know details of the case. It's okay if you have watched the video. In fact, that's one of the questions that many of the panelists are asked is, have you watched the video? What do you know about the case? What have you seen on the news? However, once they received the letter in the mail stating that they could potentially be a juror in this particular trial, they were advised to no longer watch the news as it related to this case, to discuss the details of this case, or even acknowledge that they're a potential juror with family, friends, etc. They could say that they were, doing their civic duty and participating in jury duty, but they couldn't say for what trial. However, this particular juror, juror number 3, she I would say it was a supporter of the movement and didn't think that she would be able to put her bias aside. So I want to ask Adrian, suppose you were selected for jury duty. Do you think you would be able to put your personal feelings about the murder of George Floyd aside so that you could vote and make a decision based on solely what was presented in court?
Probably not. Let's just be honest. We all live our lives based on our own personal implicit bias. And we all try and strive to be better people every day. And while I do strive to be, the best person I can be, and when I'm selected, I've been selected for jury duty before. And so you try to put your personal feelings and your own biases aside, but it is difficult. And so I think going into it, I would not be able to fairly assess the situation going in. Now, as I am hearing the arguments from both sides, at that point, I am considering everyone's perspective. And, the funny thing about jury duty, a lot of people don't realize is that there are very straightforward, strict guidelines that they give you for making your decision. And so it becomes really difficult for you to base your decision based on your personal feelings, because if you really follow the guidelines and the instructions that they give you for making your decision, it is very difficult for you to solely make that decision based on your own personal feelings or implicit bias. And so I said that to say we all go in with our own biases. Even the guy who said all lives matter, his bias is that Black lives aren't as important as others. So he is already going in there with his own biases. And what we're seeing is what we've seen for decades is the use of code language to say, we like you or we don't, or we know that we can sway you. And so in the case of juror number one, saying that she wasn't sophisticated enough was code for we think she's ignorant. And we think that we will not be able to sway her to believe what we say or to, have a positive response in our favor. And therefore, we are not going to use her. Because if they were really concerned about her ability to understand and interpret anything that's being said in the courtroom, they could have provided her with an interpreter. They could have said, we realize that English is your second language and that you understand what we're saying, but to ensure that you understand the more technical terms, we are going to provide you with an interpreter, a court-appointed interpreter. That would have been the easiest thing in the world to do to accommodate this person and allow them to be on the jury, but they chose to not go that way because in whatever she said, they felt like they would not be able to sway her to their side. And so I think what we have to recognize is that code language continues to be used. It will continue to be used. And so we just have to go into it knowing that our biases are there. But when we're responding to these questions that are often written much like the questions on a standardized test, they are not written for us. They are not written for us to understand. They are written for others to understand and for us not to get the answers right. And so we have to know that going in so that we can give the appropriate answer to make us appear to be a more appropriate choice for the jury. And I will tell you that jury duty is not easy. And people do use their own biases to make a decision. For instance, the case that I sat on was a teacher who was found to be viewing, printing, and saving child pornography at school, at home. And so it was clear that he was engaging in child pornography in some sort, not necessarily with his students, but he was printing it at school and having it at school. And there were two young boys on the jury that were in college who felt bad about prosecuting this teacher because they said, well, we look at pornography all the time. And, if it says teen, well, we're 21, but we're young. Or if they don't say it's a teen person, how do we know it's a teenager? And so their biases, even though they were given instructions not to use those biases, their biases were totally tainting their decision-making capabilities. And so this is what the lawyers are looking for, are people who already agree with them or are already swaying in their direction, and they will take those biases and build on them throughout the trial. And so those are just things to keep in mind, and again, we're all trying our best to be, the best citizens we can be, but the system wasn't set up to protect us. The system wasn't even set up with us in mind. And so we just have to make sure that we are aware of how the system works and that we're able to go into the system and make it work for all of us, and especially George Floyd. You're
And
muted.
now I'm on mute. That was very well said, Adrienne. There are a lot of factors in this case in terms of how and why jury members are selected. So there are some that we're never going to even hear from, that will not make it into the courtroom for questioning, because based on what they put in their questionnaire, they were already dismissed. Juror number 4 also self-identified as a Hispanic male. He quoted George Floyd, having watched the tape and remembering, and George Floyd pleading for his life. He said after watching the video, he formed a negative opinion of Derek Chauvin. He didn't watch a ton of news, but watched enough of the video to have been influenced by it, although he did believe that he could put his biases aside to simply focus on the facts that are presented in the case and to do his due diligence as a juror. However, he was disqualified because of his background in martial arts. He practiced jujitsu and referenced the chokehold that Officer Chauvin used on George Floyd, and essentially said, based on his knowledge, that that's a deadly move, that's a lethal move. And that was the frame of reference in which he was coming to the table. Now, other jurors, for example, the first juror that was selected, because he worked in science and described himself as logical, he was able to bring his work experience to the table, and he was viewed as a qualified juror. Mind you, this is a white male. Now, here we have juror number 4, a Hispanic male, who also has a background that could be viewed as having professional expertise as it results to physical combat. However, he was disqualified for that fact. And I thought that was really interesting as well. And so there was a sidebar that happened. There was a conversation that happened between the lawyers and between the judges, and they asked outright, is race a motivating factor in why this particular juror would be eliminated? It was argued that he was simply disqualified based on his experiences practicing jujitsu and the way in which he interprets physical combat, and that this was a quote unquote race neutral assessment, that he would in fact be a biased juror. The opposing judge argued that jujitsu, especially within the Brazilian community, is a cultural practice for some. And so disqualifying people based on their experiences in particular combat sports could be racially biased. And so when we talk about really decolonizing and unpacking the ways in which the white supremacy and racism permeate through the system, it's in every question that's asked to the jury. It's in the way in which jurors are disqualified and the justification for doing so, or the way in which some jurors are selected and other jurors who never even make it into the courtroom based on the information that they've provided in the questionnaire. It was a really, really interesting day to watch, and we can go back to running down everything that happened. At the end of the day, there were only 2 jurors who were selected. The rest of them were dismissed. We'll get to the details of who, why, and how in a little bit, but I want to take some time now to speak to some of our other panelists who we haven't heard from. So I want to first pivot to Amity and just take a moment to honor her expertise and personal experience. So if we could bring Amity on screen, I'd love to take a moment just to remember your son, Kobe, and to talk about your personal experiences. So first, please tell us, and there he is. There he is on your shirt. So please tell us who your son is and who your son was.
Hi, my son, Kobe Heisler, legal name Kobe Dimmick Heisler, was the most beautiful person I knew in the world. Next to my daughter, he was the first love of my life, my first child. On August 31st of 2019, he was having a bad day. He was on the autism spectrum, Asperger's, and was going to hurt himself. So his grandfather called the police. As soon as that happened, my son calmed down, and which was normal, and everything was fine. So the grandfather called 911 back, told him everything was fine, my son was fine, and that they weren't needed. They came anyhow. Grandpa told them they didn't need to go in the house, everything was fine. 2 of the officers went in anyhow, interviewed my kid, searched him, 12 minutes, talked to him. He was responding to them, doing everything they asked, sitting there in the middle of the room with nothing. After about 12 minutes, started to cry, just broke down, just wanted to be out of there. Got up to run out of the house, and the next thing you know, he was tased and shot multiple times in his own home in front of his grandmother. And now I only have one child left. So when George Floyd happened, well, the first 6, 7, 8 months after my son got murdered, I didn't get out of bed. But then when George Floyd got murdered, that was just it. And it wasn't even that George Floyd got murdered. It was that I woke up that day and I was wondering, why did everybody care about George Floyd? And nobody seemed to care about my son or even know about it. So it was literally the day after George Floyd got murdered that we went out and started being active in trying to make a change, trying to get justice for my son, trying to get justice for George, and trying to make sure that these types of situations can't happen in the future. So trying to affect a lot of legislation. And yeah.
And that's been your work. So first and foremost, we seem to be having a little echo. Producers, if you could, I'm not sure who that is, that needs to be muted. First and foremost, I just want to offer my condolences to you and to say thank you for your bravery and your courage. I wish that we didn't meet under these circumstances and weren't inviting you to speak on our show under these circumstances, but I want to commend you for your courage to activate, to speak, to even get out of bed. I think we discount how challenging that can be for so many people, and for you to be able to lead in this moment, especially, and to be able to lift up your son and lift up the other surviving families, other families who have lost a loved one to police brutality is incredibly bold and brave. And I just want to commend you for your work. You bring up a really interesting point about the response to the murder of George Floyd in comparison to how the response that you received and the support that you received when your son was killed. Why do you think there was a difference in the two cases?
I think there's a few things. I think one of them is that we didn't have anything to show anybody. We didn't have a video. In fact, one of the legislative pieces that we're trying to pass is called Kobe's Law, which would require body cam video and audio to be provided to the families next to kin within 48 hours. One of the things that they do is not give you access to that. And we ended up the family was able to view the body cam videos only after George Floyd was murdered and only after Minneapolis started rioting. And I'm sure only because Mayor Mike Elliott didn't Brooklyn Center didn't want us bringing the protest to his city, which we probably would have done if they didn't give us the video at that point. So it was actually Mayor Mike Elliott of Brooklyn Center and Chief Gannon that invited us to come and see the videos of my son getting murdered.
Wow. So this is well over a year then.
And the other thing is that my son's case was sitting on DA Mike Freeman's desk when the George Floyd thing happened, and they literally just jumped over my case and didn't tell us the outcome because the whole George Floyd thing was going on. So that was very frustrating to know that because of the public outcry, that case has been given more importance and more scrutiny, even to the point where DA Mike Freeman has been taken off of the case due to sloppiness, and the case has been given to Attorney General Keith Ellison. Now, I would like you to tell me, or I'd like them to tell me, how it is that Mike Freeman wasn't sloppy then on my case, Kobe's case, or Brian Quinones' case, or Travis Jordan. All of those cases would be sitting on his desk at the same time because they all happened within months before George Floyd. So I guess I'm feeling like we're really getting the short end of the stick, where none of us have gotten a fair shake. And although I don't think that any of the officers will be charged in this, at least they're getting a trial. And I think that's one thing that each of our families would like. Why don't we at least get a trial and let a jury of our peers determine whether the officers did something wrong or not? Now, clearly with qualified immunity, as long as that bill is on, as long as that's on the books, officers just aren't going to get charged.
So when your son was killed and you asked for the officers involved to be held accountable, you were told that there wouldn't even be a trial. How did you find out that there wasn't going to be a trial?
First off, throughout this whole process, they have not respected me as the mother. I never got a call back from the BCA or Brooklyn Center Police Department confirming that they indeed murdered my child when we called on day one. I never, because me and Kobe's father are separated or divorced. And then it wasn't until I walked into a working group that John Harrington and Keith Ellison had during the summer, and I saw Mike Freeman and cried. I said, why has nobody ever contacted me? And this was like months later. Finally, the next day, I got somebody from the BCA to reach out to me. The day that we found out that there were going to be no charges, my ex-husband Jason called, said that there was going to be a press conference. You know how the DA usually does that. So I went to go find that, and no, that's not what they did. They said that they didn't have the press conference because of COVID, even though we were able to have a COVID compliant press conference that day. And that's just that. And then and then the other thing is they usually sit down with the family and go over the facts of the case and how they came to their conclusion. So we also didn't get that. And even though I have asked for it more than once, I can't even get a response. They don't even respond back, but they still haven't sat down with us to explain how they came to that conclusion. But as far as that goes, I mean, I knew they were going to come to that conclusion. When I found out, I wasn't surprised at all. I've already been doing stuff to, that's why we've been working on the qualified immunity and the statute of limitations and all that stuff. Because, just like everybody else, I knew the officers weren't going to get charged. So we got to do, and the reason why is because of the laws. So if it's not working, change them. That's what we're doing. and we're not going to stop.
And that's what you're doing. You're doing that work with family supporting families against police violence. Can you tell us about the organization and how you've been able to build community with other families going through horrific experiences of surviving after their loved ones have been taken by the police? Who is a part of this group, or are there other families that you want to lift up and tell us more about your work?
Yes. So one of the main organizations I run with is Family Supporting Families Against Police Violence that Tashira Garraway started. It pretty much started out as a group just to connect, because as you can imagine, nobody understands what we've been through besides somebody else who's been in the same situation. But then we have found that there's really strength in being together just emotionally. We meet weekly, but there's also strength in numbers as far as trying to get things changed. And so we have really realized over the last year that being a united front and together all the time makes it a lot harder for people to ignore us than if we were to be trying to do this on our own. So this group has been invaluable in connecting us with other organizations and other activists, and like you guys, and justice networks, and being able to meet with legislators and being able to testify. All of these things are coming through our combined efforts and working together to share information and to coordinate our efforts. And so it's been really, really amazing. And I don't even know if this is appropriate, but I know that folks donated a lot last year. Mm-hmm. And I think that maybe some of those people assumed that maybe some of the money was coming to the families. But I'd just like to make it clear that none of it came to the families, came to a lot of organizations that support the families. I'm not sure what they did with it, but I'd just like to make it clear that if you are trying to support the families, like financially, just know that donating to any organization, even if it's ones we work with, doesn't get it to us.
Yeah, no,
and one that is to help support our efforts. Taking time off of work, traveling. Like I say, I live out of town. I mean, COVID's made it a little bit easier, but to be able to be financially able to continue to do this, it really is crippling to a bunch of us to try to do what we're doing. That doesn't even include legacy ideas that we all have when you lose a loved one. You really want something, or I can't speak for everybody, but it's really important to me to have something concrete that has his name attached to it, that it will help people. And I think it's just really important to a lot of us that we are able to do some sort of legacy in our loved one's name. And of course, it could be a whole gambit of things, that would be considered a legacy foundation type of thing. But just putting the shout out that we all need help with that stuff.
Absolutely. Well, we've got people viewing and watching right now and listening, and people who will continue to view this. And it's my hope that the right people do step in to support family supporting families against police violence. The work that you all have been doing, especially in the past few weeks, has been absolutely phenomenal. And so I want to commend all of you for really banding together to support one another, and the work that you've been doing to mobilize. Even the idea in which you haven't even been given the dignity of being able to get the details of your son's case and knowing whether or not that there will be any type of accountability. And yet here you are on the front lines, making sure that people like George Floyd and his family get their justice. It is not going unnoticed. And again, I just want to commend you for your work and your service within community. You're just so beautiful inside and out. And I wish that you never had to experience what you have. And because you have, there is a strength and a courage in you and Tashira and so many others that is deeply admirable. And it is the surviving families. It's the people who have taken their experiences and turned them into power that really keep this movement going. And so I just want to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing and to say thank you for sharing your son and the story of your son with us. I want to ask you one final question before we pivot to our last panelist. On your shirt, it says autism is not a crime. What do you want our audience to know and to understand about autism so that people can better support children and young adults who have autism?
I think one of the first, so autism is not a crime. We're going to do, my thing is backwards. We're going to do mental health is not a crime also, t-shirts, and you can get these at Amity, go find me. But it's really important that we recognize that mental health and autism are two separate things. So one of the things we were able to do was get a special session last year for some of these police reform bills, and we were able to get the autism training bills and the mental health training bills. And what that means is that, it's requiring police officers to get the stepped up level of training. But even though I was a part of that process and I sat on the working group, I don't in any way agree with police being responders in these situations at all. So like when we run in our groups, everybody kind of has their like little niche, and so for me, I bring up the mental health and autism aspects of things. And so it's just really important for me to have people help me pass legislation and not even pass legislation. I mean, some of it has to do with just even coming up with the ideas, like really, how do we do this? How do we reallocate the funds to the more appropriate people? There's like, it's probably easier said than done, but it's really, really important because, like I say, my son was just having a bad day, and to have like SWAT response come and tactical and sneaking up to the house and 4 grown men all, with their weapons and everything like that. That is not how you respond to a person who is having a mental health issue. In fact, that's probably the worst thing you can do. So what I really need is everybody to understand that it's okay to not use police in these responses. And I wish that I was actually better prepared, because I see that Colorado just put out their first 6 months of doing something like this, and it was very, very, very successful. And I just think to all the people that I know, like my bouncer friends, my nurse friends, my teacher friends, just ordinary people, how many people that I know on a regular basis are able to de-escalate and control these crazy situations without any violence whatsoever. So I'm still just trying to figure out why the police can't seem to do that. But I think it's really important for the police just to be police and deal with violent responses and leave it to that. Everything else needs to be reallocated to the people that are more appropriately able to deal with these situations. So my focus is and will continue to be, probably until the day I die, making sure that people that have issues are safe.
Absolutely. Thank you, Abby. Thank you for your work, and thank you again for being a panelist. I want to pivot now to Ayolanda Mack, who is the co-founder of the Black Family Blueprint. Ayo, are you there?
Yes, I am here. I hope you can
Hello,
hear me
how
well.
are you?
Doing well. I'm doing well.
Now you're not in the Twin Cities. You were outside earlier. We saw some blue sky. We saw some warm weather, maybe a little
Yes.
beach or something.
Yes, I am in Florida. I'm down in Southwest Florida. So down, a little ways out from the busy bustling city.
Yes, yes. Well, that's okay. Everybody definitely needs breaks. And after the summer that you had last summer, I know that you and your family need and deserve a vacation. So, as Northside residents and leaders within the community, tell us about just what your experience was like last summer after the murder of George Floyd.
Yes, last summer, oh man, I told myself I need to take some intentional time to really reflect on what happened last summer because a lot of it is a blur. I remember watching through people's live feed on social media what was happening in South Minneapolis. And I remember saying, I don't have to explain to my children that another Black man was killed by the police because it has not touched our community. And then a day later, everything in North Minneapolis literally blew up. It exploded in North Minneapolis. And I had to have that conversation with my children. I had to have a conversation with my husband about what family and community safety looks like. I had to have a conversation with my friends and community, my neighbors, about what community safety looks like. And we had to make some really difficult decisions that we wouldn't normally have to make as it relates to our family safety to ensure that we were safe and protected. And so it's opened up a huge conversation in my household and in friends and family and communities household around how do we sustain ourselves? How do we as a collective Black family be safe? What is it that we have to do in terms of our safety to hold ourselves down if it hits the fan again as it did in our community last summer? And then also just having this conversation around the day-to-day violence that we experience within our communities. How do we work in terms of being responsible for mediating some of that so that we can quell our own nervous systems and be in a space where we can be prepared to protect our own?
Yes, you mentioned many important points. There was the murder of George Floyd, which happened on the South Side, where I'm at right now. I'm actually on Nicollet and Franklin, I believe, in the New Coven location. So not far away from George Floyd Square at all. But even though it took place on the South Side, all of this stuff moved to the north side of Minneapolis as well. And grocery stores were burned and stores were looted and there was all of this destruction. And on top of that, there was this significant increase in community violence. And so it was deeply traumatic for many residents. And I know, especially as a parent, incredibly challenging to have to explain to your children what's happening and how to survive through it, especially when you don't know yourself what's going to happen. You know, in all of the years that I've been in the Twin Cities, I've never seen anything like what happened in the summer of 2020. And I know for you in particular, you really activated and leaned into the moment and were able to lead and support other families in protecting themselves. In the event that something of that nature happens again during the upcoming trial of Derek Chauvin, what advice or recommendations do you have for mothers, fathers, family members, and other community leaders just to protect themselves in this moment?
That's a good question. What last summer showed our family is that as ready as we felt like we were, we really weren't ready. We didn't really have a safety plan. We didn't have another space to go stay. We didn't have any real outs out of the community to go live somewhere else. We had not prepared with other families. We had not prepared our children for what this type of thing is and what it looks like. There's just so much that we didn't have. Now, in terms of like person to person combat, I feel like I can defend myself. I can defend my family. But this thing that happened across the whole community, seeing these unmarked cars pass through our community, knowing that we were not in the company of friends, but that we were in the company of enemies, and the enemies had literally occupied our neighborhood, really caused me to ask the question, where are we at? And how did we miss this? And how did we become accomplices in our own demise? I had a lot of questions. And so what I would suggest, and I'll say Nick Muhammad with Black Civic Network, this is one of their mottos around the work, is that the revolution starts at home. Freedom starts at home. And so it's so easy for us to go out in the streets and to raise our voice and use our collective power to speak truth to power. But I would really suggest and urge people to make sure that you have the pieces intact at home. What do you need to be safe? What do your children need to know to be safe? What is even your perspective and understanding of safety? How are you preparing for when it all hits the fan? How are you preparing for it? Do you have enough food? If our grocery stores close again, do you have enough food to eat? Do you know how to grow food? These sound like really big ideas, but there are some pieces that we have to think about. How do we survive when our grocery stores are taken out? How do we survive when our pharmacies are taken out? How do we sustain ourselves when everything around us is burnt to the ground? What is it that we're supposed to do? And so I do suggest that we start at home. We start with ourselves. We start with our self-care. We have to make sure that we understand the climate that we're living in. We understand all of the ways in which white supremacy works. We have to start with our own self-education and reflecting. We have to build our bodies up. Can you run a mile? When this stuff happened, I was recovering from an Achilles tendon rupture. I was literally in a cast. I was, for the most part, immobilized. And I had never felt so helpless in my life when all of these things were happening. And I'm like, I don't even feel like I'm in a space where I can defend myself right now because of this temporary disability that I'm experiencing. And so building up our bodies, we're still in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic. We have to think about what it means to eat healthy, to have healthy and strong immune systems, to get enough sleep, again, to be able to run, to be able to literally hold and carry our own weight. So those pieces of wellness, mental, emotional, spiritual wellness, is really important for the preparation. And then there's the piece around defending. How are you going to defend your home? My fear is that what we've seen play out in the stores, with stores being blown up and set to fire, my fear is that may move more inward into our residential areas. And if that happens, how are you going to be able to sustain your home and protect your home, or have a place to get your family to safety? And so lastly, I'll say that this work is what many of us call abolition work. And the abolitionist movement, the freedom and liberation movement for Black folks, was not successful without weapons. It was not successful without firearms. It was not successful without plans and strategies, and it was successful without collective action. And so those are the things that I am urging everyone to really think bigger. Secure your family, and then secure your neighborhood, secure your community. It has to be done in partnership, and we have to think of it from a holistic perspective.
Yes, I love the concept of a holistic assessment of moving forward and not just doing things in a vacuum or in isolation. This is a moment, community is a verb, and this is the moment to lean into that and to really think about, how is my safety tied to their safety, right? You think about the South African concept of Ubuntu. I am because we are. So if my neighbor is not safe, am I really safe? If my neighbor is not prepared, then am I really prepared? Are we as a collective prepared to face the fact that something different than what we traditionally experience as it relates to the everyday encounters with racism and white supremacy? There could be heightened or amplified experiences that come up as the trial progresses. And so what Io and so many others in community have done has really started to hold a mirror to themselves and think critically and to say, is what I'm doing and the conversations I'm having, are they helping equip us for this moment, right? We saw people called 911 during this particular time. During the summer of 2020, there were community members in the Rondo community, in the Frogtown community, on the South Side and on the North Side, who all reported calling 911 because of the suspicious activity that was happening within their neighborhoods, and they could not get through, or they would call 911 and they would file a report of suspicious activity, the unmarked cars or cars with no license plates driving down the streets and, harassing people having garbage cans set on fire, community entities, gas stations and grocery stores being set on fire. It seemed like there was no real help. I think that was the sentiment that a lot of people felt here in the Twin Cities during the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, is it felt like we were on our own. Now, if you go back and you watch part one of this conversation of Black Life Amplified, the conversation that we had just last week when we talked to public officials about Operation Safety Net and the plans that they have, and they've been working on essentially since May of 2020, it sounds as if there is a more proactive stance, and that our government officials will be more equipped to deal with if, in fact, there are bad actors that descend upon the Twin Cities and come in to wreak havoc. What have you heard about Operation Safety Net, Io, and do you trust or feel safe with the pivots in public safety that are happening around the Twin Cities?
I will be honest in saying that I have not given it much of my attention. We were on our own last spring, summer, and it was very scary. And I believe that we had been on our own prior to that. And I still believe that we're on our own. And I think that our safety is our responsibility first. And we cannot rely on a system that continues to oppress us to then turn around and support us and keep us protected. Those two things really can't exist at the same time. Now, I say that with being someone who has had to call 911, who has had to rely on a police presence for support. I have lots of different reasons on why I've had to engage. And I've had good situations with the police department, and I've had very abusive and horrible situations with the police department. At the end of the day, as we say, like, yo, we all we got. And we have to get with the program. And we have to remember that this is in our muscle memory to do. So I have not paid much attention with the Operation Safety Net because I don't think that it's gonna make much of a difference for us. Like, there's a thing that we're dealing with our oppression and the way that it has become internalized and the way that we implode upon one another. Operation Safety Net ain't gonna do nothing for that. That is the work that we have to do. We are responsible for our healing. And so when we lean into what healing looks like for us within our families, within our interpersonal relationships and the ways in which we engage and connect with one another, I think that we will be able to have safer communities just from that. Then we'll get to a point where we can actually do some of the mutual aid and assistance for each other that we really need. So I know, again, this sounds like a really altruistic kind of idea, and in many ways it is, but we can do it, and we've done it before.
Yeah, no, you bring up a really great point. In you look at policing, the police job, it's their job to protect and serve. And as a community, historically, I don't think that many Black people have felt protected and served by this entity. As you mentioned, many of us have had experiences and encounters with the police that were positive, and then we've had also very negative experiences. And so it can be hard for many community members to feel safe, to feel protected, to feel as if Operation Safety Net is for them, especially when they already didn't feel like the existing system of public safety and policing was protecting and serving them from the beginning. And so I think there's more to be done and said as we think about, is it possible for there to be a future in the city of Minneapolis and St. Paul without police? What does public safety look like in 2040? That's a question that I asked Mayor Fry, and I'm interested in continuing to revisit that conversation. I want to ask all of you panelists, we're in this critical moment in history right now. The trial is underway. Jury selection process is underway. In fact, juries are being selected as we speak, who will decide the fate of Derek Chauvin and the other officers involved in the murder of George Floyd. This is arguably the largest case of police brutality that our country and our world have ever seen. And we happen to be at the epicenter of it. Ayo, you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned Operation Safety Net may address external forces or may be a well thought out tactical plan. But one thing that was not addressed last week as we talked to our local officials is about the ways in which community implodes on one another after experiencing this trauma. Now, we did talk about additional mental health resources being released within the community in the city of Minneapolis, supporting some of those initiatives, and other organizations like the Minneapolis Foundation supporting community healing. But public safety, especially as it relates to the Black community, has to be led by members of the Black community in order for it to be effective for us. And so all of you do that work in one way or another. And as we close, I just want to ask for you to give any final thoughts that you have for our audience, and then to answer, what do you envision for the future of Minneapolis? So Amity, I'll start with you.
I envision a defunded police department. And before people freak out about that, not dismantled, still have the police, but a re-envisioned system. And I think it's kind of funny because I don't even live in Minneapolis. I plan to, but it's really, really important for me to make a difference there. It's simply due to population and where most of the people that I love live. So I believe that our efforts will not be in vain. I believe that all of this hard work that so many people have been doing is gonna pay off. I think this is our once in a lifetime opportunity to make big comprehensive change, both at state and federal levels. And I believe that there's a bunch of people that are aware of that, and that we are all collectively trying to take advantage of that and make the change while we have what I consider a slight opening. And so I believe that the future of Minneapolis should be brighter.
Thank you, Amity. And Ayo, what about you? What do you envision for the future of Minneapolis?
We have so many healers. We have so many healers amongst us. And I guess I envision, first off, let me say, on a systemic level, what I would love to see is the city of Minneapolis really continue to look at all of the ways in which it has continued to disenfranchise and marginalize Black and Brown communities. And I really want to specifically talk about the Black community in Minneapolis. I think that it's important when we have the conversation about reparations that we look at the ways in which city, county, state, and then federal law, government sanctioned violence has been inflicted upon Black families. We can look at all the demographics across the city and see that Black families are not doing well in the city of Minneapolis. So on a systemic level, I would love to see the city of Minneapolis do a deep dive. I know that there's the Mapping Prejudice Project that's looking at redlining, across the Twin Cities. And so I think that is very important, is to look at the idea of reparations on a city level, as the city of St. Paul is doing. But then on a more interpersonal level, we have so many healers amongst us. I would say that the recast office in the city of Minneapolis is doing amazing work. The Office of Violence Prevention is doing amazing work. I think that we need to fund healers, we need to fund solutions, and we need to continue to pour resources into great ideas that will have a positive impact on the citizens in the city that need more, because they've been taken away from with the government sanctioned violence. And so that's what I would like to see. I would love to see more functional autonomous zones. I would like to see more pouring into the mutual aid, and I would love to see more community and neighborhood building. And I would absolutely love to see, if we're talking about 2040, I would love to see Black homes begin to have what they need to do the repair. We have internal repair that needs to happen as the external reparations happen. And so I would love to see resources, time, energy, education being funneled into our families and into our homes that will have a greater impact upon the whole city.
Very well said. And all of this is possible, right? Especially if community members are able to join together to make their voices heard, whether that is through direct action, protest, and community organizing, whether it is in policy work and lobbying, whether it is going in to your homes and raising your children to be free thinkers and to be community conscious and to be well-rounded. There are holistic solutions that are available to all of us. And so whether you are a healer, an activist, whether you work in the media like I do, or you're a storyteller, a painter, a writer, all of us get to work together to envision the future of this city. Although this is a moment of not just national, but global recognition as the trial of Derek Chauvin gets underway, this is not the defining moment for the Twin Cities. What will be defining, particularly of the Black Twin Cities community, is what we do during this moment and what we do after this moment. We have experienced heartache, we have experienced trauma, we've experienced loss and grief that is just unimaginable. And still, we have the opportunity to reimagine something better and to go after that. And what I think this moment does is it really illuminates that there's a global eye on the Twin Cities. And so while the world is watching, what will we show them? What will we show them that the Twin Cities is made of and what our leadership is made out of? And as somebody who's born and raised in this community, I have high hopes and expectations for what can come out of such tragedy. I want to thank you both for remaining with us. Thank you, Amity, and thank you, Ayo. Thank you for your contributions to community and being able to push through such horrific experiences and to continue to lead and to do so with such grace and determination. It's not easy and it's not always fun. And it would be so much more simple if we didn't have to fight for our basic human rights to exist. And if we didn't have to fight and say, yes, in fact, our Black lives do matter. But for whatever reason, here in 2021, even in the middle of a global pandemic, this is our reality and we are making the most of it. And so I want to thank you for doing the work that you've been doing. I want to give a very special thank you to our audience members for watching and supporting Black Life Amplified. Make sure you join us next week, the 17th, as we continue our conversations about the trial, about COVID-19, and about other issues impacting the Black community here in the Twin Cities. I also also want to give a very special thank you to our sponsors, the Minneapolis Foundation and Northpoint Health and Wellness, as well as Children's Minnesota, for making this town hall possible. And a big thank you to our producers who work behind the scenes, scrambling to get all of the details done so we can do this show live every week. And that's another update. If you didn't know, Black Life Amplified, we are going to be broadcasting weekly now throughout the duration of the trial. There's so much that's happening and that's moving quickly. And so we are going to be here as often as we possibly can to give you those updates and keep you informed and also to listen. So please continue, panelists, to let us know what you're doing and how things are going in the coming weeks. We want to continue to hear updates and to support and amplify your work because it truly is important. Thank you to Northpoint Health and Wellness, the African American Leadership Forum, Insight News, Gray Matter, the Spokesman-Recorder, and Minnesota Community Care for doing everything that you do to produce this town hall. And I'm going to go ahead and sign off. My name is Brittany L. Wright with Insight News. It's been an absolute pleasure. Please, all of you, continue to take care of yourselves and fortify your spirits. We are just in the beginning stages of this trial and have a long way to go. So take care of yourselves and have a great afternoon. We'll see you next week. Take care.